task, and we can pause and go over things. So I'm just going to open up my Godot project. And as I mentioned, so what I'm going to do is I only have one level right now. I'm going to create another level, and then I'm going to create a little portal to connect the two levels. And so obviously this will allow you to sequence as many levels as you want to. You don't have to have multiple levels in your game. You can have, one big level. You can have lots of little small levels. It's, I want you guys to kind of create whatever you think makes sense. But this will be a useful thing if you want to, start working on different scenes and connect them together. Another thing that we're going to talk about, this is going to touch on a bunch of different concepts. And so you can use this for a lot of things besides just connecting levels. So even though we're just going to be talking about how to connect levels in this demo, you can use this type of, the same basic approach of this for doing things like collecting items. Some of you guys have actually added stuff like collecting items or other things outside of the scope of what we've covered so far, which is awesome. It's great for you guys to kind of explore, other things that you can add into the game. But yeah, this touches on a bunch of different concepts that we'll kind of talk about. And one of the main things that I want to talk about that we've already kind of talked about is sort of the separation between functionality and vision. So in the scene that we've already got set up, we kind of looked at this when we first built the scene. All of our objects have a mesh and a material that makes them visible. So like our ground has a mesh, which is the kind of shape of the ground, and the mesh has a material which makes it visible. But the mesh and the material are separate from the collider, which is the thing that collides with other shapes. So even though they occupy the same space visually, they're actually two separate components. And as we saw, when we looked at that at the very beginning in our first demo, if I take out the collision shape from the ground, the ground doesn't work anymore. I just fall through the ground. So even though we can see the ground, we need a different component, the collision shape, to actually make the ground work. And so a portal kind of works the same way. Instead of having a collider that prevents our player from moving into a space like we have with our trees and our ground in this basic scene, a portal or another area actually detects the player, enters the area, but doesn't prevent the player from type of collision. And that's going to allow us to detect when a player kind of interacts with something in the scene. And using a script, we can use that event, that interaction, to do all sorts of different things. Whether what we're going to do now is load a different scene, or you could be collecting an item or interacting with some other component. So that's what we're going to set up right now. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second level, just so I have somewhere to go. So I'm just going to duplicate the level that I have. And I'm just going to change a couple things just to make it obvious that they're different. So I'm going to make a level 2. So I just duplicated my level 1, and I'm just going to open up level 2. And I'm just going to get rid of some of this stuff. So I'm just going to delete this tree. And I'm going to get rid of my other trees. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time building stuff out because we've already kind of learned about how to do that. But we do want our levels to be different. So I'm just going to make a really simple change. I'm going to change the ground color. So I'm going to go into my mesh instance here and go to material, and let's get rid of this material. And then I'll find a different material. Maybe I'll use my green material. And so now we can, at least visually tell the difference between the levels. When we're making new levels, we want to make sure that they're visually different. You can also make other differences, like functional differences. You could change the gravity. There's lots of things that you can change between levels, but we want to make it clear to the player that they're in a new level. So you see that in countless different video games. Really, quick example is like Mario, with you start in the overground world and then you go to the underground world, and there's this like very striking visual difference, so you always know where you are. Um, so just changing the color here is really all I'm going to do just to make this very simple. But now we're going to build our portal. So I'm going to go back to level 1, and I'm just going to add a portal. I'll put it, let's see, let's put it like maybe in between our trees over here. And so I'm just going to make an instance. I may end up turning this into its own scene later, but I'm just going to build it inside of my scene now. So I'm going to go to level 1 and add a child node, and I'm going to create an area. So an area is a collision object like the static bodies that we use for the ground and the tree. But an area doesn't prevent objects from. So it has all the same properties in terms of needing a mesh and a shape and all of those things. Actually, it doesn't need a mesh because we don't really need to be able to see it. But it doesn't prevent the player from moving into it. It's just going to detect when the player is inside of it. So I'm going to move this area up a little bit in my hierarchy, and I'll rename it portal. And so this is just going to take us from level 1 to level 2. And so the first thing I'm going to do is add a collider shape. So there's a little warning here. It says we need a collider shape, so we're going to add that. So I'm going to go to add child node and find a collider shape, collision shape. And for here, we just want to choose something simple. It doesn't really have to match the visuals. It can match the visuals, but we want to choose something simple because the more complex we make our shapes, the more work our game engine has to do. So I'm going to make like a little cylinder, or I'll make a box shape. That'll probably be a simple shape. And I'm going to move the portal over here. So when I make the collision shape, I don't want to move the collision shape. We've already talked about this, but I just want to review it real quick. Right now, all I can see is like the geometry for the collision shape. And if I have the collision shape selected and I move this, I can do that, but now my portal and my collision shape are offset. And that's going to make things harder to work with in the future. So I want to be very careful that once I create that collision shape, if I want to move the whole thing, I want to move the whole object, so I have the portal selected, not just the collision. When we add a mesh and we add other portals later, it's going to make things. So I'm just going to move my portal over here, and then I'm going to move it up a little bit. And I just need something big enough for my player to intersect with. So it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to give the player an area to walk into. And so to start, I'm not going to add any visuals. So we'll see that the functionality of a portal is going to work regardless of whether I have visuals or not. I can change the size and shape a little bit. As long as my player can run into here, it's fine. So let's put it, maybe I'll just make it a little wider. So if I walk through trees, I'll be able to run into it. So now I'm going to choose my collision shape, not the portal. I'm going to choose the collision shape and click on the box shape and just extend it a little bit more. So I'm going to extend it on the z-axis. If I double it, maybe so that gives me 4 units on either side. Excuse me. So that's a pretty good size to run into. And so now we're going to do the most important part, which is connecting an event to a script. And so we need to do a couple things for this to work. First, we need to create a script. So I'm going to create a portal script that is attached to my portal. So that way I can put portals anywhere and they'll all have the script attached. And so I can easily recreate a portal. I don't have to create the whole thing again, starting from scratch. And so this is the first time we're going to create a script. It's going to be a really simple script, but it's going to be a chance for us to go over all the components of a script. So I'm just going to select the main node of my portal. And then if I go over to the inspector, and I scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see there's this script area, and that's what I'm going to be using. And I don't have the script yet, so I'm going to go here and click New Script. And that's going to bring up this new dialog box. So it wants to know where I want this script to go and what my template is. And then you can see here it says inherits area. So it's already, since I have the portal area node selected, it knows that I'm attaching the script to an area. And so it says inherits area here, which is useful because that means it inherits the properties of the area, which I need in my script. For the template, I'm going to choose, I usually go with empty. You can do default. It has some like code already in it if you do default, but we don't really need that. So I usually go with empty. And then the path, we want to change. I like to organize my files by type. Some people will organize their files by like what they're related to. So they might have their portal scene and their portal script in the same folder. But I like to organize files by type. So I don't want this to be in my scenes folder with my levels. I want it to go into scripts. And where I already have the player controller, I'm just going to save this as portal.gd. So this is GD is a Godot script. I'm going to click open here and then click create. And that creates a new script for me that has the first line of the script, which is extends area. And like I mentioned, basically extends mean that we get all the properties of an area. And we're going to need that because one of the properties of an area is we can detect when the player moves into that area, which is how we're going to know when to activate the portal. And if I right click on here and click lookup symbol, you can see all the relationships or all the things that the area inherits. The collision object is how we know that it's colliding with another object. The spatial is the basic 3D object. We have the node and then the basic object class. And you can see down here, we're going to look at if it's overlapping with a body. So we're going to be able to use that signal. So down here, if we look at body entered right there, that's going to tell us if the player has entered the area. So that's what we're going to be using. So let's go back to our portal script. And so our portal script, usually when we write a new script, we want to use comments to block out what the script is supposed to do. So a comment in Godot, let me increase the font size. Okay, so to write a comment in Godot, I just put a little hashtag, and that means anything that comes after the hashtag is going to get ignored. So it's not run by the program, so I can write whatever I want. And so for my portal script, I need to know basically what level to load next. So when we go into the portal, I need to know when player has entered. And then that's pretty much it. We could add other stuff, like we could play a sound related to the portal. But this is really the main kind of like basic things that we need to do with our portal. So we really only have to write a couple of lines of code because Godot is going to kind of help us write some of the code. So the first part we need to do is figure out which level we're going to. And so this is this we have to write. So we're going to start with export. So we talked about this a little bit in a previous lesson. Export basically means that it's going to expose this variable to the editor. So I'll be able to go back to the editor and edit the properties once I've added export. The next part we're going to say here is the variable. And then the variable name is we're going to say load level. Okay, and there's a couple other things we have to do here, but oh, it's not quite, yeah, so it's not quite done yet. So one thing that we can do in Godot, so far we've said we wanted to expose it to the editor using export. We're creating a variable, which is just basically a keyword or a shorthand for some piece of data. And then we gave this variable a name, which is load level. And so this is the level that we want to load. So the one thing that we have to add here is because we're looking for a specific type of data, we have to include what type of data that is. And so we can give Godot basically like a little hint by putting parentheses here and then putting the type of data we want to use. And that type of data, in this case, is called a packed. And basically what that does is it lets us choose the scene, our scene that's going to get loaded when we run this. So now you can see the script variable is exposed to the editor. And so I can edit this from anywhere, but if I was not writing code, if I was just adding the portal, I would see this load level variable up in my script variable. And so now to choose the level, I don't have to like write anything in the code itself. I can just go to load and go to my scenes folder and choose level 2. So now I know that this will load level 2. So the thing that's really useful here is that I can create as many portals as I want, and I can just change the level that gets loaded. So they'll all work the same way, but I can, add lots and lots of different levels to be loaded by the different. So that's the first part of our script. Pretty easy. We've already set that up. So the next part of our script, Godot is going to write the first part of this for us, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So we need to know when the player has entered. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to detect when the player overlaps with our area. And so to do this, on my portal, I'm going to go to the node section. And this node section, as we saw with our code, has all of the events that this area can detect. So it can detect if it overlaps with another area in the scene. It can detect if it overlaps with a body. And then there's a bunch of other stuff it can do as well. So our player is a kinematic body, so it's an object body. So in order to detect the player, we need to use the body entered. And to connect this to our script, we just click on that event. This is called a signal. And then we click connect down here. And then we have to choose the script that we want to connect it to, our portal. And so we just say connect here. And then it says on portal entered body. And so whatever code we put here is the code that's going to run when this event occurs. So it's not going to happen when we start our program. It's just going to wait until the player enters here, and then it's going to run. So a couple things to mention here that are kind of general programming concepts, but also you can see how Godot implements them specifically. So you can see with this function that got written for us, the first word in this code is func, F-U-N-C. This is a shorthand for function. A function is a part of your code that is basically like a list of things that you want the code to do. So if we look at our player controller, there's basically two parts to this script. There's all the variables that set things like the speed, the mouse sensitivity, the gravity. These are all variables that represent different values. And then once we set up all of that stuff, we have a bunch of different functions. And these functions run scripts on specific. So we're basically like saying this is what the code should be at these various times. So the ready function runs once when the scene starts. And so that does stuff like it sets the input mode for the mouse and it sets the default speed. Then the input function runs whenever an event is detected by the game engine. So if we move the mouse, we press a key, this input function is. And then the input function has all the code that deals with, key presses and mouse clicks, stuff like that. There's also a process function. This is the function that's running and updating your game 60 frames per second. So every single time the game is being redrawn, this process function is what's telling the game, to draw everything that you can see in this. And then the physics process is a separate function that is a similar thing, but it just does the physics update. So it goes through all of the objects in the scene and checks whether they're running into each other, whether they should be accelerating, all of those. So these are all different functions that are basically lists of things that we want our code to do when we want our code to do. So our portal function is really simple. So we have the keyword function, then we have the name of the function, This is usually descriptive of what the function does. And one thing that Godot does is if Godot generated a function, it's going to put a little underscore in front of it. So if I write my own function, I would say something like this, my function. So if there's no underscore at the beginning, that means that it's my function that I wrote as a developer. If there's an underscore, that means Godot created this function. So then the function name should describe what it does. So it says on portal body entered. So this is when the player body enters the portal. And then a function is always followed by parentheses where we can put arguments. And arguments are things that determine how the function. We don't really have to go too far into that right now. One thing here is that we're not actually going to use the player body at this point. So we're going to get a warning. And if we want to avoid that, I can put an underscore here. Putting an underscore in front of this argument basically don't actually plan to do with the body. So then at the end of the function, there's a colon. And this basically says this is where the function's. And then you'll notice that the next line is indented. This is a convention in Godot. The way that Godot knows when your function is over is when I go back to the original indentation. So anything that is indented over by 1 inside of this function is part of that function. And then when I come down here to my function, and I say pass here, that's how I know that I've created a new function, is that I go back to the original. So everything inside of our function has to be indented over. And until we actually have code in here, we use the word pass to say, just ignore this part, because we haven't actually written this part. So if we hadn't put this in here, we would get an error because there'd be no code that comes after the function. So that's why that's there by default. Okay, so that's a lot of explanation for one line of code that we're going to write now. So how do we load a scene? We use the getTree function, which is a Godot function that basically says get all the data in my game. And then we're going to use a method, part of getTree, called load. Where is it? Change scene, sorry. So we're going to go to change scene. And then the scene that we want to change to is whatever scene has been added into this load level variable. So we're just going to copy load level and paste it in. And that's literally everything that we have to do. This should work. I'm going to try it, and then I'm going to go over 1 or 2 more things, and then we will be done. Okay, so this should work if I run into my, oops, okay, it didn't work. Maybe I used the wrong function here. Okay, let's try load. I actually have never seen this particular error before. I'm just going to Google. And let's get. So, okay. Invalid type in function. Never seen that one before. Let's just Google that real quick. Invalid function change. Okay, it looks like this person is trying to do the same thing. Oh, it looks like they changed the API. Okay, so we need to use change scene to file. Let's try that. There is no change scene. Maybe they update it again. Let's try change scene. There we go. Okay. So one thing about open source development and development in general is that they change the code base to make it better. And so sometimes there's something new that I haven't tried yet, or since the last time I've done it. Let's give that a try. So I'm going to run into my scene, and there we go. We've loaded a new scene. So now I'm on my green level. Okay, so that's really all our code does. A couple more things to look at real quick. So I go back to my 3D scene. Uh, we do have to make sure that the player and the portal are on, are going to interact with each other. So we talked about this a while ago, but all of your objects have a layer and a mask. And the layer is the number layer that the object is on, and the mask is what they're kind of interacting with. And our player actually should, uh, our player is layer one, uh, and our portal right now also layer one. But that means that our portal is also interacting with all these things that it doesn't really like the ground, which is also layer one. So we can make our game more efficient because our game is so simple. We don't really notice this right now, but as your game gets more complex, every object in the scene, if they're masked and layered to each other, they're going to be looking to see if they're interacting with each other all the time. So this adds a lot of work for your game to be doing. And so if your game is like mine and it just has a few things in the scene, it doesn't really make a big difference. But as your game grows in complexity, this adds a lot of work and it'll slow your game down. So the way that I can fix this is add some different layers and masks. And there's these default layers, layer 1, 2, 3, 4. But to make this a little bit easier, we can actually add labels. So the labels don't really do anything functionality wise in the game, but it makes it easier for us to organize things and remember what we want things to be. So to set our layers, we go to project settings and you can scroll down. It's somewhere, it's all the way down here under layer names, but you can also just type in uh, layer into the search property. Oops. And that'll kind of, bring up just the things that have layers. And so we're going to go to 3D physics. And so we can make layers in our 3D physics engine that will interact with each other. So I usually like to make the first layer the player layer. You don't have to do it that way, but that's what I usually do. The second layer I usually make, ground or platforms. I'll usually call this platforms. And then we can make our third layer portals. And so that way these different components don't have to look and see if they're interacting with each other. They can just see if they're interacting with the player or other things that they need to interact with. We also actually have some colliders in our scenery. So let's add a, well, I guess we can just make those black. So I'm going to save this and close. And now if I click on my player again, when I open this layer menu here, you can see the labels are here. So you don't have to use the labels, but it makes it easier to remember what they are. So for my player, I'm just going to put the player on layer 1, and I'm not going to touch the mask at all. For the ground, I'm going to put the ground on the platforms layer and turn the player layer off. And for the mask, I'll just choose the player. So this means the ground is only going to be testing to see if it is interacting with. So then for my portal, I'm going to change the portal layer to portals and turn player off. And now for the mask, I'm going to leave the same thing. I'm going to leave it on the player layer. Now my portal will not be trying to detect if it's interacting with the ground. It'll only be trying to detect if it's interacting with the player. Then for my trees, these are also colliders. So I could do the same thing in here. I could go to collision and I would put this on the platform layer. If I want to be thorough, you don't really have to do this. Okay, so that's not going to change any of the functionality at all. So I'll just demonstrate real quick. If you have your layers messed up, so if I have the portal not masking for the player, you'll see I'm going to be able to walk right through the portal and nothing's going to happen. Because even though I have the script and I have the portal exactly the same way as it was before, it's not on the same layer, so it's not actually even checking for the player. So if I turn that mask back on to layer 1, my portal will reactivate. There we go. I forgot we added that jump sound. Okay. So one last thing, let's actually make the portal visible. And this is where I want to demonstrate that your collider shape and your imagery or visual do not have to be the same thing. So for my portal, I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna add a mesh instance. And I'm gonna go to the mesh and I'm gonna choose a cylinder. Okay, so it doesn't actually match the box, but that's okay. And then I'm gonna click on this and I'm gonna make the height very small, say like 0.1. And I'm gonna leave the top radius same. Yeah, I'm gonna leave all that the same. And then I'm gonna go to my transform. I'm gonna rotate up on Z. So I'm gonna do 90 degrees on Z, rotate to face the player. Then I'm gonna scale it up on X and Y, or it's just X, make it more shaped. Okay, so it doesn't match my box at all, but as long as I get close enough to here, that's what I want, for the player to go into. And you can kind of play with this. You might want your box to be smaller than the portal, so you have to get in there. You might want it to be larger. It doesn't matter, functionally. It just matters if you want the visuals to match or not. So let's actually make this a little bit wider. Do like 2. Okay. So that gives a nice big area for the player to go into. And I'm going to make a new material for this. So I'll say new spatial material and click on here. And I'll get an albedo. I'll make it like maybe kind of pink to make it stand out a little bit. And then I could do some other stuff. Like I could put some alpha in here, make it kind of transparent. If I want to do that, I'm going to have to go to flags. And so now it's transparent. So that's kind of cool. Turn the metalness up, specular up, so reflective. And maybe I'll put one of my textures in to give it a little texture. So I'll go to textures and I'll give it the texture. And I'll match that texture. And then I'll just quickly for the UVs turn on triplanar so the texture works better. And okay, so you can kind of see it. It's a little too transparent. So I'm going to go back to the color, turn that up a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So that's good enough for now. I could also add some emission. Maybe I'll put some emission on here. So it'll actually emit some. That could be. Get some like pink light. And okay, anyway, that's good enough. This isn't a shader demo. Okay, so I've got a material, so now I can see it. And so now again, my collision shape doesn't have to match this, but what we're gonna notice, so right now the collision shape is much bigger than the visuals of the portal. So if I run my scene and my player's like, oh cool, what's this weird portal thing over here? But if I get close to it, but I'm not really in it, it's gonna trigger earlier than I want it to. So that's what you really have to worry about. They don't have to be the exact same shape, but there's a relationship between. All I'm going to do is take my collision and I'm just going to make it smaller. So I'm going to shrink it down here like that. And then it doesn't even have to be this big. I'm going to do like 0.1, or no, I want X to stay 1. I'm going to do like 1 on. Oh no, that's the opposite. Okay, let's do 0.1 on. Okay, so it's really like in the middle of the portal, but it doesn't matter as long as I collide with that area, the portal is going to work. So let's try this again. And so now I really have to get close to the portal for it to trigger and bring. So again, as I mentioned before, this basic setup is the way that you can create lots of different actions in the game. If you want to collect items, you know, you can trigger other events in the game. It doesn't have to be going to another level. It could be like revealing a section of the game. It could be like revealing some text, revealing a character, or triggering a character to do something. This is a pretty basic thing that you can use in a lot of different places. Okay, so one last little bit, and then I'm gonna stop and let you guys work on your projects. So we've created this portal. We may want to use portals in other places. So I'm gonna review. We've already done this with our trees, but I'm gonna review turning this object into something that I can instance in other places. So what I'm gonna do is click on the portal, right click, and I'm gonna say save branches scene. This is gonna make a new scene with all of this information in it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to scenes and call this portal.tscn. And now my portal stuff is gone, but now there's a scene button. So I can click the scene button and I can edit my portal here. And I'm going to want to reset the transform. So I'm going to reset the transform so it's at 0, 0. So it's centered in this scene. And then if I go back to level 1, it's going to be in the wrong place. But that's okay, because what I really want is to just move this instance over here. And now it's, now I can put it into other places and it won't be like randomly offset somewhere. Okay, so now let's say I just go to level 2 and I only have 2 levels. So I'm just going to add a portal going back to level 1, just as an example. So to add in the portal, I hit the instance button and I type in portal. And there's my portal. I'm going to click open. And so now it makes this new portal right in the middle of the scene. I'm going to lift this up and move it over here. And now I just have to say where I want this portal to go. So I'm going to click on the portal and go to my script variables. And right now it's just going to load itself, which is not what I want to do. So I'm going to click on here and click load and go to scenes. And now I'm going to click level 1 so I can just go back right to level 1. So now I can run level 2. Oh, I have an error. Level 2 is already being loaded. Click. Uh-oh. Done something weird. Take a look at my screen. Oh, I should change. I think that matters, but let's. Huh. Okay, let's take a look at this. I'm just going to turn this off. Second, if that fixes the error. No, okay. So I might need to go back to my original portal and just clear this. So maybe that's the issue. So I probably don't want to have the original portal load a specific level. So let's try this. Okay, so that fixed that. Go back to level 1 and just fill in that level again. I go to scenes, level 2. Okay, hopefully now this will work. Nope. Okay. All right, let me just Google this real quick. So, what did I do? Click reference level. So it doesn't, I can't preload the level. Okay, so this is just because I have two portals going back and forth to each other, which is why. Uh, so I should maybe just write. Okay, okay. So if you're not doing it this way, you really won't run into this error. But one thing that we can do is we can change this to a file reference, um, and change our code right here. So this will probably be more extensible anyway. There's probably lots of cases where you're going to want to do this. Let's just update our code. So I'm going to go to my portal script. And so now instead of adding a packed, or no, we still have a packed scene. Or no, okay. So instead of adding a packed scene, what we're going to do is just a file string. So I'm going to change this to string, comma, file, and it's going to look for only .tscn files. I'm going to upload this to the GitHub. And then this is actually a smart thing that we should have done anyway, but let's just, so load level, so we're going to change this just a little bit. So we're going to check to see if this exists, if resource loader dot exists load level. Then we're going to change the scene that level. I'm not going to add the error in here, although that is a smart thing to do. Okay, so now let's just reset those values. So we're going to load the level. So load level 1 will load level, and level 2 will load 1. Okay. All right, now this will finally work probably. Okay, there we go. Now I can just run back and forth between my two levels, which is not that exciting, but you can imagine, making lots of different levels or kind of sequencing your levels together and making something a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly update that script. I'm just going to go to GitHub real quick. And I don't want to upload everything here. Or actually, I don't mind. I'll just put all this stuff. Oh no, I don't want to put. Yeah, I don't want to put everything up here. I'm just gonna put um, the portal script. Ignore this other stuff for now. Say adds portal script and commit to and push to origin. And then I'm going to go to my GitHub repository and go to scripts and portal. And I'll just post this in the Discord so you guys can take a look at that. Okay, so that's the portal script. And so that's it. We'll go over some other stuff next week, but I think that's good enough for now. And we can use the rest of the class, you guys, to work on your